Welcome back to the living room, and it's my great pleasure today to welcome Professor Michael Samuel, who has a very complex title, so if you don't mind, I'll read it out. He's research professor in matrix biology, and he heads up the tumour laboratory at the Centre for Cancer Biology on North Terrace in Adelaide. A very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Michael.
So I'm professor of matrix biology. So the matrix is like a scaffold around which all the bits of your body are built. And it goes wrong in cancer. So we are interested in finding out how it works in normal situations and how it's broken in the abnormal situation of cancer.
So my understanding is you're saying that cancers move around? And this is part of the study? Or?
Yes, I think the cancer cells are able to use the scaffold or the matrix in different parts of the body to colonize and move around and metastasize, as we say. Yes, and this part of the tissues is a very important part in the process.
So that's the very specific study that you and your colleagues are doing?
That's right, yes. Yeah.
I'd like to go back to the beginning and say you were born in Sri Lanka. Did you go to school in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I went to school in Sri Lanka till year 12. And then I moved to Australia to go to university at the ANU, which was a big change.
Yes. So I've really got to ask, what inspired you to get involved in such an interesting area of research that we all value and need?
So I've always been interested in science and understanding how things work.
As a young boy?
Yes, as a child. So my grandfather was a physics teacher.
In Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, yeah. So he would come around with lenses and lamps and lights and help us, understand how these physical objects worked. And I think that's one of the reasons why I now use microscopy in my work. We do a lot of imaging and image analysis, and a particular technique called confocal microscopy, which allows you to essentially slice through optically a tumor or a piece of tissue to understand how it's built on the inside. So that's how I started.
So you're in Sri Lanka, you're inspired by your grandfather in Colombo, but why in ANU? How did Australia come into all this?
So I did apply to a few places around the world to go to university, the ANU in particular gave me this full scholarship, which was a great opportunity to be able to
Was it for Sri Lankan students or?
No, it was for all international students were eligible to apply for it. They had a separate program for local students as well. And so they kind of looked after you while you were studying, which was excellent. And the ANU is the best university in this country. Yes. So it was well-resourced, it had very smart people, so I was able to do my first bits of research there. So I went to university there, and then I worked at CSIRO for 3 years before moving to Melbourne to do my PhD.
And then my understanding is you went on to Glasgow, or?
Yes. So what I then did was, so usually after you do a PhD, you need to work a few more years in a sort of training role to learn to be a scientist as a postdoctoral fellow. So I did that training in Glasgow in Scotland at a cancer research institute there. And then I moved to Adelaide in 2011.
Is there any reason why you're still not in Canberra researching?
Oh, well, this is really strange. I hadn't actually thought why I'm not in Canberra anymore. One of the good things about being in a research as a career is that you're able to travel around the world and do things in different places. The scientific language is very similar around the world, but scientific approaches are not necessarily the same. So different places have different equipment, different expertise. So we move around, particularly when we're young, trying to collect knowledge and expertise and experience. So I guess I'm still not at the ANU because I moved on to a different place to learn something new.
You came to a very good place. You finally arrived at a very good place.
Yes, I did finally arrive at a very good place.
And we're so thrilled to have you here because you're making some wonderful discoveries, as I understand.
Oh, I've been privileged to work with people who helped me make those discoveries.
Well, I also believe that you started out by yourself, but you've now built up a team of 6 people working under you?
There are 11 of us in total in my team, an extended team.
And this is all on North Terrace. This is all happening here in downtown Adelaide.
Yes, it's all on North Terrace.
And are you all working on that same piece of research, or?
We're all interested in what we call the tumor microenvironment. And the tumor microenvironment is everything that makes up a tumor mass that is not cancer cells. And that may be more than 50% of the tumor mass is not cancer cells, but it's normal cells in the body that the tumor has somehow hijacked. And they're essential for the tumor to grow. But the interesting thing about these other cells is that they don't have any of the mutations that cancer has. They're essentially normal cells, but they are under the control of the tumor, so they are behaving. They're a bit like zombie cells that are behaving.
It sounds like a movie script.
Yes, so they're in thrall to the tumor. Yeah.
So if I've got any one of the things you've just said, would I be aware of it, or?
Be aware of the tumor microenvironment as a patient. So one of the things that people are asked to do is regularly check themselves for lumps and things like that.
All over the body, or?
Well, usually it's either testicular self-examination or breast, yes.
Yeah.
And so what you're actually feeling is this matrix, which is part of the microenvironment, and it's stiffer around the cancer than it is in other parts of the body. That's why it feels like a lump.
And do you know why?
Yes, because the cancer cells hijack these normal cells which make this matrix. And the matrix is mostly collagen, the type of thing that people inject into their lips.
And people are trying to get it into their body so they don't have wrinkles and things.
Yes, so this collagen is
actually
actually it is ironic. It's in an abnormal form, which makes it a lot stiffer than it normally is. So your skin would have quite a lot of collagen in it normally, but when it's around a cancer, it's stiffer and more dense, and you can feel it. And its density is really important for the tumor to grow.
What I really would be most interested to know is, you're doing all this work on North Terrace in Adelaide. Do you work collaboratively with researchers in Europe or in the States or in Asia for that matter?
Yes, so we have actually quite a wide network of collaborators, the people that we work with. A lot of them are in Australia, in other cities, in Adelaide as well as in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane for the most part. Because I did my postdoctoral research in the UK, I have a lot of people that I still work with there in Scotland as well as in England, and also in the United States. So I'd had to put together recently a map of all the places that people that I work with are from, and it's quite an international bunch. So the people who work in my area, so there's a pioneer in the field, she's in San Francisco, she's called Professor Valerie Weaver. We worked with her quite a bit. She's one of the first people who realized how important this stiffening of the matrix is for tumor growth. So, we have a close working relationship with her and her lab. Yeah.
And is there anything that, just say it's me, let's take somebody's body, is there anything that I should avoid doing that might add or might help this develop?
I'm not sure that it's actually necessarily a lifestyle thing. So generally people are asked to avoid certain things in order not to get cancer, but the specific stiffening of the matrix is not really something you can avoid happening generally. There is some association between exposure to sunlight and changes in the skin that could make it easier for a cancer to grow, but nothing specifically matrix related is really evident at the moment. The way we normally work at it is to try to understand how it works. So we're interested in what's talking to what and how these things happen. And so we recently discovered a couple of proteins that are produced by tumor cells that hijack both the matrix and the immune system. And together this changes the environment that the cancer is in. So we're currently working on a way to try to block these two proteins from either being produced or acting, doing what they do. And hopefully that will add to the repertoire of therapies that we have down the line once they're developed. We have spent, and I mean in cancer research, governments have spent a lot of money trying to work on the cancer cells themselves to find out what's wrong with them, how they behave and what they do. The tumor microenvironment research, which is everything that's not the cancer cells, but is still part of the tumor mass, understanding that is a bit behind in that respect. So if I had a very large grant, what I would do is to go systematically examining all of the different parts of the microenvironment. So we work on fibroblasts and immune cells, but there are hundreds of other different cell types in there that all contribute to this disease. And there could be opportunities for understanding them and opportunities for targeting them that we could exploit.
Most people, researchers, go for grants back to the federal government.
Yes.
And that would probably apply in other countries.
Yes.
Are there any countries that are ahead in recognising that they should be putting more money into health?
Yes, I think a lot of the more developed countries or countries in the OECD do invest significantly in medical research. The United States in particular, very significantly, but countries in Europe like the UK and Germany do as well. And interestingly, some of the American government agencies do fund research internationally.
Oh, isn't that good?
Yes, a colleague and I have a grant from the United States Department of Defense to work on breast cancer. They have a big breast cancer research program.
What an interesting combination of people.
They have had a breast cancer research program for a very long time. And they fund internationally because they want to support the best people.
And would there be other researchers in other states in Australia that would be working collaboratively offshore?
Absolutely,
as well?
yes.
Because that seems to me the route to take, if everyone can get together and share the finances that are required and the integrity and the intelligence, I guess.
Yeah, so I think what we normally do is we try to partner with people who have expertise in an area that we don't. So we complement each other. So my colleague is actually in Sydney. So he works on a specific aspect of cancer and I do something complementary. So we formed a team together with a few other people. So some people here and some people in Sydney to put this proposal forward.
Well, I know that a while ago you were awarded an amazing grant of $500,000. Please explain that one.
So this was a grant that we got from Worldwide Cancer Research, which is a cancer charity based in Edinburgh in Scotland. And they fund cancer research around the world. And they gave us this grant to look at how cancers hijack the immune system to help them proliferate and grow and spread around the body. And we had discovered that a particular protein that is produced by cancers actually modifies the way in which certain immune cells behave. And so this is an intriguing and interesting aspect of cancer. And if we can figure out how to block this particular protein, we could have another way to stop cancers from exploiting their environment. And if they can't do that, they can't survive and grow.
I'm slightly attached to this grant, aren't I? Because I was your advocate, the community advocate for that. Yes. Not that I did anything, I simply said yes to everything and signed my name, but I'm very proud of the fact that you got that amazing grant. But I'd like to say it's fairly well known that I've had breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And I've always thought that people get tested regularly for breast cancer, but they don't at the same speed get tested for ovarian cancer. So, and you don't know when you've got it.
No, that's
for
right.
the most part.
Breast cancer has a high profile, and it's of course one of the things is that the advances we make in understanding breast cancer do in fact help us understand other cancers as well. There are certain similarities that mean that certain insights you get into breast cancer can help you understand other cancers. Even though they're not identical, there are similarities. So for instance, we discovered this whole collagen and matrix stiffening thing in skin cancer initially when I was a postdoc in Glasgow.
Gracious.
And then when I moved to Adelaide, I decided to look to see where something similar is happening in the breast. And the reason we did this was because, in fact, it was easier in the lab to study breast cancer because the funding was better and there was more resources available.
Yeah.
And so then we made this advance in breast cancer showing that this protein is secreted by tumor cells that hijacks the microenvironment to make more of this
and
collagen.
what starts the secretion? I mean, what is it? Is it something in one's body that one could try and prevent? I still am bewildered by all that.
Oh, okay. So the main reason why cancer cells start to behave differently in their environment is because they acquire mutations in their DNA. And this means that they're not controlled in the way they normally are. So a cell has a very defined lifespan. It's born, it does what it needs to do, and then it dies. But what happens during the initiation of cancer is that there are mutations in the DNA, and that means that the cell then starts to behave abnormally. It's not controlled in any way, and it can continue to live beyond its normal lifespan. It keeps dividing. And when that happens, it starts to do strange things. And whatever it does that works keeps happening. If it doesn't work, that cell dies. So it starts to produce this protein because for some reason it realizes that that protein can make this scaffold.
Yes.
And it's good for the cancer, so then there are more and more cells that do it. It's kind of a selection process. It's like natural selection, exactly like happens with species.
So could it be genetic?
It is genetic. Cancer is a genetic disease. So you either have a mutation you inherit from your parents, or it happens during your lifetime. And then all the cells that are born from the cell that had the mutation will also have the mutation. If you acquire these mutations in your lifetime, that's often because of environmental factors. So sun
Tell
exposure.
me what they are then.
Yeah.
So that's the sun. What else? Because we've got to think about the things we have to avoid.
Well, I'm not a clinician, so I'm not actually
No.
giving health advice. But the things that often cause DNA mutations are radiation, including sunlight. Alcohol is not great for
That's
some
a
cancers.
sad story.
Yes, and then there are a few susceptibilities that you inherit from your parents because of your family history. Chemicals, you can be exposed to certain chemicals in the environment.
I've thought often, my mother had breast cancer and then I had breast cancer. And I've discussed this before with some of your other research colleagues. But I've thought often in retrospect that women of my mother's age and women prior to her, just looking at breast cancer for the moment, may well have had all of that and didn't know they had it in the old days before researchers of your level were...
And before screening was implemented.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that could apply to a whole variety of cancers that a whole variety of people could have had in older generations.
Yes, it's entirely possible.
So cancer really only has been discovered at the level at which you're talking about quite recently, hasn't it?
Well, cancer has always been with us. There's historical references to tumors for a very long time. But I guess the awareness of cancer early on is something that we now have the advantage of. Although, in fact, in some ways, it can be a disadvantage. So particularly
how can that be?
Particularly prostate cancer screening has been a bit of a problem. So most men... the statistic is that most men will have a tumor in their prostate at some point.
That's almost the norm. Is that what you're saying?
But it's never going to cause them any trouble.
It's just going to survive.
It's going to just persist
and
there.
they survive.
And often these men will die before that cancer starts to be in any way a problem. But if you screen for these early, you find them, and it's something that you wouldn't have found had you not screened.
So it's probably better not to know. Is that what we're saying?
I'm not saying it's better not to know.
I can't quite comprehend that.
I don't think it's necessarily better not to know. I think we need to make decisions on whether to treat it or not and how to treat it, and whether people are scared by the fact that they've got something. So one of the things that we are starting to look at is to find out whether, working on the tumor microenvironment, we can identify groups of patients who would benefit from chemotherapy and distinguish them from patients who we probably know wouldn't, because they are likely to have a recurrence of their disease, in which case they need to be treated differently or they're not likely to experience a recurrence of their disease. So they don't need to get chemotherapy necessarily after their primary tumor has been taken out, because it's actually quite hard on the body. So these are some of the other
Well, I
advances that
need to
people
put
are
my hand up here and interrupt and say, in my case with breast cancer, the decision was remove everything in the breast.
Yes.
And I never had chemotherapy. I never had any of those treatments. I was a very lucky person.
Mm-hmm.
I am a lucky person. I'm still here.
I'm glad you are.
This must be very hard for people sometimes to know what step to take next. That's really what I'm saying.
Yep.
So if it's possible to expose some of the work that you're doing and your colleagues, then it's easier perhaps for people to understand.
Yes, that's right. So it's quite apart from actually new therapies to treat cancer. Some of it is to decide which of the existing therapies are appropriate, and we need to understand how individual people's cancers work in order to figure that out. Yeah.
Michael, I know we've already said this, but I think we have an amazing precinct on North Terrace with what you're doing and your colleagues are doing, Summary, the Proton. It's just an extraordinary precinct. It would be good, I think, for more people to recognise what we have here in downtown Adelaide.
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, we spoke earlier about how, we have international and national collaborations, but we can't underestimate the value of proximity. So having a critical mass of people focusing on a particular problem in a particular place. And what that brings is it brings recognition. So people actually realize this is happening here. So funding comes from that. If people want to do fundraising for cancer research, they have in mind the fact that we have this precinct in North Adelaide that, amongst other things, has people working on cancer. And also it means that there are people of different expertise that can work together in the one place as opposed to needing to get expertise from outside. So I think it's a good thing that we have this burgeoning precinct where we're recruiting more and more people from other parts of Australia and internationally, and giving opportunities for younger people to set up their research.
It would inspire, one hopes, younger students to pursue this.
That's right. We often have school students coming through the lab to spend a few weeks or months, or during their holidays, they do work experience in the lab and they get inspired by the things that they see, hopefully, and they'll be scientists of the future.
Well, you're certainly doing fabulous work on North Terrace, and I'm absolutely sure that young people will be inspired, I hope, to follow and to become involved with you and your group. And we have to thank you for existing, because some of us are still existing because of the sort of research that's been done by you and your colleagues.
Thank you very much for having me.